you've been hacked, all your money's gone, and then your mortgage company called and there's a problem that, I think a lot of people think, oh man, if that happened, I would become homeless. And the reality is no, you're probably 20 to 30 relationships away from ever becoming homeless.
This is the Faithly Podcast.
Today on the Faithly Podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Tensley Almand. He is the president and CEO of Atlanta Mission. Atlanta Mission is one of the largest faith-based organizations serving people experiencing homelessness in Atlanta, and Tensley brings a pastor's heart and a leader's vision to the work. Tensley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So Tensley, you bring a pastor's heart because you are a pastor. You spent many years as a pastor before stepping into leading this important ministry. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, even my journey into ministry is a fascinating one because I, like many people, I didn't grow up in church. So, lived here in the South, and all of my friends went to church, and on Sunday we'd go to the lake. And so even me finding myself in ministry was a fascinating journey, but gave my life to Christ in college, and quickly God called me into ministry, and honestly thought that would look like serving the local church for my whole life. And so did that for 20 years, the last 12 of which my wife and I and 4 other families started a church here in the city of Decatur, right outside of Atlanta. And really thought I would do that for the rest of my life. It was some of the, just sweetest times that I can remember. It was great. And so our whole vision was to create a church that unchurched people would love to attend. And I can remember probably about 10 years into that journey, and the church is just growing. It's full. It's healthy. You're looking around, and it was almost like God whispered, get ready. And that's kind of a scary thing. But I can remember kind of thinking at that point, like, I think maybe we've done it. Like, people loved our church and it was growing. And even people who didn't go to church with us loved our church, and they were glad it was in the community. And so I entered this 2-year period towards the end there where I remember wrestling a lot with that big, like, what's next question, and never thought it would mean like leaving that church or starting something different, or especially never thought it would be Atlanta Mission. That was like not even on my radar. But as God, so often works, a friend of mine called me, and he knew this search was open, and he said, "Hey, I think you should apply." And I told him he was crazy. I said, "There's no way I'll do that." And I did. I finally applied, and I thought, this is dumb. This is never going to go anywhere. And wow, God used that to totally change my life and change the trajectory of our family's life. And I joke, but I tell our board seriously too. I spent 8 months. That's how long the interview process was. I feel like I spent 8 months trying to talk them out of hiring me, and they hired me anyway. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a pretty terrible leader because they did what I told them not to do. But I'm so glad they did. I mean, I have never really like, apart from being called to plant a church, I've never felt more called and placed in my whole life. So it's been a cool journey to get here. And I'll stop with this. I'll tell you this. I think for me, the ultimate, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but in the New Testament, in the Gospels, there's this encounter with the early followers and John the Baptist. And basically they asked John, like, "Hey, Jesus is, all these crowds are coming and people are gathering, and we're not sure what all this means and what it looks like." And so they basically ask him, like, "Hey, what does it mean to follow Jesus?" And his answer, this isn't exactly how it's written, but his answer is essentially, you should live a life that is consistent with the one you say you follow and the one you say you believe in. And he kind of summed up, faith in that direction. And I can remember God using that in my life to say, "Hey, you've been very willing to do that in a setting like starting a church. Would you be willing to go do that for the most vulnerable citizens of a city? Would you be willing to do that for a group of people that most people, if we were honest, would rather pretend didn't exist?" And that kind of wrecked my life. That's really how God used, Scripture and who He is to push me out of a comfort zone into something totally different.
Wow. I'd love to ask you more about that 8-month period. Did you know during that time that, yes, like this is the next step in your calling? Did you have to deal with anxiety or impatience? Because 8 months is a really long time.
The short answer to all of those questions is no, because I genuinely didn't think this was the next step. I mean,
Mm.
I really like the entire thought process through the whole thing was, God, if you want me there, you're going to have to do it. And so I don't think this is normal, and I'm not recommending this for people. Um, but my journey was, I mean, I never prepared for an interview. I never tried to pretend. I never tried to fake. I kept telling myself, you're smart enough that you can convince people to hire you. And that would be the worst thing ever, because I don't want them to hire some version of me that's not real. Like if they choose to do this, they need to know who they're getting and why. And so that was really freeing for me. Actually, I'm not proud of this, but I actually made it hard on them. Part of the interview process was over Christmas, and I was pastoring a church, and Christmas is like the season, right? And at one point in the interview process, I got an email that said I needed to be at this meeting the day before Christmas Eve for an interview, and I just told them no, I can't. And they didn't know what to do with that. The search firm was like, well, what do you mean no? Like, you have to be here. I said, I can't. I'm committed to the church I'm leading, and there's no way God would say, go do this and take away from this thing. And I'm not going to do it. And they said, well, then you may be out. And I said, okay, that's fine. If I'm out, I'm out. And they called me back and they said, the Atlanta Mission admired that. They're like, they respect that. And they said they would follow back up with you in January. So yeah, that was it. It wasn't, I would tell you, I did not think that God was doing something to actually move me until about halfway through that process. And this maybe ties into a little bit about what we want to talk about later. Um, I finally asked him, like, why me? Why am I here? This doesn't make sense to me. I'm a pastor. And they began to describe what they were looking for. You kind of said it in your intro. They were looking for somebody with a pastor's heart, but who was a visionary leader and who was a systems leader and who was entrepreneurial. And I can remember as they described to me what they were looking for in the leader, when I left that interview, I called my wife and said, I think God's about to mess up our plans for our future. I don't know that I remember exactly. I don't know that they're going to pick me, but I now know why we're here, and I'm exactly what they're looking for. And that was a scary thought.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tensley. Like, I know that your story is giving someone encouragement right now, because I think for those of us who have a strong sense of calling in our lives, I think when that calling shifts, those can be some of the scariest moments. And I think being able to do what you did, it spoke volumes to the folks who were interviewing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am like, I agree. That was one of, like, personally, the thing I wrestled with the most through the process was calling, because I am a little old school. I genuinely believe God's called me to ministry. And I can remember asking our senior pastor at the time, am I turning my back on calling? And his answer was so encouraging. It was no. Like, he's like, I actually think you're going to go be more of a pastor than you ever have before. And he was right. I mean, it has been that. So yeah, I think to the person who's wrestling with that, calling looks like a lot of things. I think we make it smaller than God wants to make it.
I love it. I love it. We could end the conversation right now and someone will be inspired and encouraged and blessed. But let's keep going.
Okay.
So, Tensley, when you first stepped into the role as the CEO, what would you say surprised you the most about the realities of homelessness in Atlanta?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest surprise to me was just the sheer complexity of it. Um, I had no experience with homelessness, very little experience with poverty, no experience with addiction, and all of a sudden I was asked to lead an organization that's all we do. And so, from somebody who is able to stay somewhat distant from that situation, it's really easy to think that it's, um, solutions out of it are easy, and they're just not. For political reasons, they're not easy. For personal reasons, they're not easy. For spiritual reasons, they're not easy. For just the systematic reasons of how the systems all work in a city, it's not easy. When I first started, somebody shared this with me. They said, never forget that homelessness resides at the intersection of broken systems. And that has stuck with me for the last almost 5 years now. And I think that's really what you see is there's just a lot of broken systems that have gone into somebody finding themselves at a place where they're now unhoused. And so therefore, the pathway back out of that is just as complex as really the pathway into it. And we could argue all day, and my hope would be that we could simplify some of those solutions. But I think that probably surprised me. Is just you would think, and I would hope it would be easier for somebody to get back on their feet and find safety and stability and security than it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so a lot of people think it's a housing problem.
That's right.
Right? People think it's a simple problem with a simple solution. It's complex. But what are some of the deeper issues?
Sure. I'm glad you're asking the question, because I do think, on its surface, you hear lots of people say homelessness is first and foremost a housing issue. And there's no doubt about it. At some point, part of the solution has to become stable housing, right? But one of the things we talk about all the time is if all we do is move somebody into a house without addressing the core issues or their core traumas or identifying the reasons why they're experiencing homelessness to start with, in a lot of instances, all we've done is moved their homelessness indoors. And in fact, in some ways, you run the risk of making it worse, because now you've created isolation. For a lot of our clients, they find a place to stay. Well, that place to stay is just them by themselves. And that just exacerbates some of the problems. But yeah, I think, the causes are all over the place, and I think they would surprise everybody. Certainly addiction plays a part. Certainly mental health is a big part, but a lot of those, addiction and mental health, follow homelessness. They don't always cause it. And I think that's a misnomer that a lot of people have. Another thing that was kind of going back to your last question that fits here is that was surprising to me is just how many people I met that they literally could have been me. They were, 6-figure earners at a time, or they were highly educated or came from a good family, and one bad decision led them to a pathway of another bad decision to another bad decision, and then all of a sudden they found themselves at a place of almost no return. So we find that those traumas, they can be spiritual in nature, they can be vocational in nature, they can be relational in nature. It's all over the map of why people are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah. Wow. So how do you work towards long-term transformation in this situation?
Yeah. So at Atlanta Mission, I think the thing that we're probably most proud of is what we call our transformational model. We certainly provide emergency shelter, but that's not the only thing that we do. And none of this is anything against anybody who does something different. Like, obviously, we need all kinds of models out there because there's all kinds of people out there. But for us, we looked up one day, probably 12 years ago now, and realized that 80% of the people were with us just over and over and over, again. And we weren't ending their homelessness. We were giving them a nice, safe place to stay. But they would show up at our door 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, get a meal, get a shower, get a bed. If they chose to go to classes, go to some classes. And then by 7 o'clock the next morning, they were back out on the street, and then they would repeat the cycle over and over again. And we said, hey, I don't think this is working. And so we kind of turned that model on its head. And we said that the thing that people need first is safety and stability. If we can meet that core need. And so instead of giving people, 12 hours of shelter, what if we said, even in our emergency shelter, you could stay with us for 30 days. And for 30 days, you didn't have to worry about where you're going. And we could provide counseling for you. We could provide advocates for you. We could do some light services with you to try to identify what could we do to help you over the next 30 days get to a more stable solution. And that's about 40% of the beds that we offer. The other 60% of the beds go to our transformational model, which is full wraparound services. And those clients are with us for upwards of a year or more. And during that time, they're getting healthy spiritually, vocationally, relationally, physically, mentally, all of those things. And we're working with each client to tailor make a program that identifies their trauma, addresses those core causes of their homelessness, and then puts them back on a pathway towards self-sufficiency. And it all wraps up with a vocational training program that helps our clients not just get a job, but keep a job. And we find that's a huge thing as well, that a lot of our clients are really good at getting jobs and really bad at keeping them. And so we give them those soft skill training, that things that probably you and I take for granted, of conflict management and how do you deal with, the workplace environment and all of that. And what we're finding is, of those clients who go all the way through our program, about 70% are they're still housed and they're still maintaining their job a year after graduation. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so it's an incredible program, getting
Yeah.
a lot of really great results.
So moving your emergency stay to 30 days, have you seen that change, like results for your clients?
Yeah, it has definitely added safety. It's definitely added stability. 30 days it sounds like a lot of time. It's not. I think that's probably one of the places of our greatest frustration as well, kind of back to the complexities. Most people don't know this, it can take longer than 30 days to get an appointment at the Social Security office to try to, figure out your, ID situation. And so I think those are some of the things that cause us frustration, but it has definitely helped people to stabilize. And for many, that 30 days is the respite they need to maybe rebuild and repair a relationship, so they have someplace to go, or something like that.
Yeah. And how do you decide if a client is going to be in your 30-day program or your 1-year program?
It's largely client choice. We are big proponents of dignity and choice, and we want to advocate for you and on your behalf. And so, what tends to happen is, a lot of the clients that show up at our doors are not at a place yet where they think they want a year-long program. And that's just, again, everybody's journey is different, but for a lot of people, um, showing up at Atlanta Mission or any shelter, um, is a harder decision than most people would ever think. When you show up here, I say this all the time. I feel like Atlanta Mission is the most authentic version of church I've ever seen. And the reason I say that is because, even as a pastor, I know that for an hour on Sunday morning, everybody can show up and they can hold it together and they can put their best face on, and all looks good, right? Nobody shows up at Atlanta Mission in that space. And when people show up at our doors, it's an admission finally of need something different. But even for our clients, that sometimes takes 2 or 3 times going through our 30-day shelter before they're willing to say, okay, I'll give your program a try. I need more than just 30 days.
Something that you've alluded to a few times in this conversation is the importance of relationships. And that's something I've heard you talk about, is relational poverty being just as devastating as financial poverty. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that was probably another surprise for me getting started. And I'll tell you a story in a minute that God used to really just drive that truth home in my own personal life. But yes, we've seen over and over and over again that relational poverty is absolutely as devastating as material poverty. And material poverty alone is devastating, right? We all know that. But when you take material poverty and you couple it with somebody who is completely relationally broken, you have no safety net. You have nowhere to turn. And what we have found to be true for almost all of our clients is that at the root of their homelessness is typically a wake of broken relationships. And the way I try to help people understand this is for you and I, and probably all of your listeners, if we got that dreaded text message on our phone from our bank that says like, you've been hacked, all your money's gone, and then your mortgage company called and there's a problem that, I think a lot of people think, oh man, if that happened, I would become homeless. And the reality is, no, you're probably 20 to 30 relationships away from ever becoming homeless. In fact, if you lost everything, and if I lost everything, tonight we wouldn't be on the street. And that's not true for our clients. Our clients are at a place and have been in this place for long enough that they no longer have healthy relationships. Many of our clients show up to our doors and they don't even have contacts in their phone, not contacts that they could use. And as simple as this may sound to your listeners, I mean, that's a checkpoint for us, is that before you graduate our program, are there 3 healthy relationships in your phone that you can call that are outside of Atlanta Mission, because we can't be your healthy community forever, right? And so a large part of our program is rooted in this idea of getting people rooted in community. And so here's the story, and I think this will drive home. When I first started, I was brand new, still trying to kind of figure out even where my office was, like that new. And I'm hearing this about relational poverty, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know, maybe I get it somewhat, sure. At the same time, in our personal life, my wife and I were navigating a situation with our oldest son, where he had gone to college and he had just colleged a little too much, and we had to bring him home. A story many people are familiar with. And so he had just come back into our home. All of us, him included, you're just kind of filled with disappointment. It's like, this isn't the story we wanted. What are we going to do now? And so I got him a job working construction, and I was very intentional. I called a buddy of mine with a large construction company, and I'm like, I want you to work him so hard that he realizes he needs to get his act together and go back to school. Now, here's the cool thing. God writes better stories than dads do. And he's actually loving that job. He is back in school now. He is thriving. He could own his own construction company one day. It's
Wow.
just amazing to watch. So, that's great. But he gets the job. His job site is downtown Atlanta. And his first day, he shows up and they tell him where to park. And if you're familiar with Atlanta, it's obviously smaller than New York, but similar. Like, you just can't park wherever you want. Like, you got to pay attention. He's 19. He thinks he knows everything. And so he finds a spot that's closer to the job site. He's like, I'm going to park here. And here's the reality. He leaves work. Now, he's got the job, paychecks coming in 2 weeks, health insurance starts in 2 weeks, all the things he's got this upward trajectory. Comes back to his car and there's a boot on his car. And he doesn't know what to do. And so he calls me. And when I answer the phone, he says, Dad, I got a problem. I've got a boot on my car. And I'm like, oh no, that's not a problem. There's a number on that boot. You call the number and they will tell you how much to pay. And then you pay, and then they come out and remove the boot and you go home. And he said, Dad, I have another problem. I was like, what? He goes, I don't have any money. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any money? I put money in your account. This is probably another conversation, but I don't have any money. And if I can't get this boot off my car, then I can't get home. And if I can't get home, then I can't get back to work. And if I can't get back to work, then I don't have, a job. I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to get paid, all the things. And I was driving down the road and we're having this call, and it was like God was saying, I hope you're listening, because the only thing standing between you or between him and homelessness is me and the relationship he has with me. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that same story from one of our clients who they were living on the margin relationally. They were living on the margin materially. One bad decision, parked in the wrong spot. I lost the job, never got the paycheck. Now I'm stuck in this city and I have nowhere to go. And I think that God used that to show me how powerful healthy relationships and community really are in preventing something like homelessness for people.
When you stepped into leadership at Atlanta Mission, you described yourself as Chief Question Officer.
Right.
I love that. I am totally stealing that. But so tell me, what made you call yourself that? Like, what were some of the questions that you were asking?
I mean, I had no choice. I didn't know anything about what we were doing. And so I think that was another thing God really used was that season to humble me to say, like, hey, you have no idea what you're even doing. So you got to figure it out. So the first thing I did is I met with, we have about 180 employees, I think. And I met with every single one who was here at the time, one on one for short meetings. And I asked everybody what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, and what's confusing. And I just took notes and notes and notes and notes. And really, the answers they gave me began to shape how I decided to lead after that. And so I came in and I told the board immediately, like, hey, I don't know enough about what we do. There's no way I'm going to be able to set a strategic vision or direction. I've got to ask a lot of questions. And so that became the bedrock. And I have a whole notebook. I still have it. My assistant will, from time to time, pull it back out and share just different things. And it's really the answers that I got began to form the foundation for the strategic plan that we put together and the direction that we're walking in now. And so it created alignment. It created unity. It showed that I was willing to just humble myself and learn from everybody else and understand, hey, what is your perspective of this place and what we do and why we do it. And really from there, I drove everybody crazy with another set of questions. We came up with this kind of clarity index. And I just said, hey, there's essentially 4 questions that every single person should be able to answer. And we should answer them all the same. And it's, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it? And then where do I fit? And so we go back to that talk over and over and over. What are we doing? That's our mission. We exist to, we transform through Christ the lives of those who are experiencing homelessness, poverty, and addiction. Why are we doing that? So all we serve and all who serve have the opportunity to know, walk, and live for Christ. That's why we're doing it. Well, how do we do that? Well, we're a community that's united in homelessness one person at a time. And everybody in the organization should know the answer to those questions. And then the big question is then where do I fit? And that's what turns your job into something far more than a job. It turns it into a mission. I don't want anybody thinking, well, I cook or I clean or I, work third shift. It's like, no. You're transforming through Christ the lives of those who are experiencing homelessness. That's what we're doing. So, I'm just a big fan of questions. I'm a curious person. And so, I think it would serve a lot of leaders better to ask more questions and to listen more. I guarantee you, your people they know what's going on in the organization. You just got to ask them.
That's so good. I'm so moved by your leadership style. You lead with humility and curiosity and clarity and with a vision. Now, let me ask you this. Leadership of a Christian nonprofit, is it very different from leadership of a church? Like, what did you find was different about leading now versus at a church?
I think there's a lot of similarities, and I was so fortunate. I mean, I worked at a great organization that was a really complex, big organization. I was one of many campus pastors all over the city, and so I was used to complexity, and so that helped me a lot. I'm a geek when it comes to organizational leadership. Like I love organizational leadership. And so I think having that kind of curiosity towards it anyways was also helpful. But yeah, it was, it was different. As I told the board here, I've sat at the table. I've just never sat at the head of the table. And so being that point leader, I learned really quickly, leadership's pretty easy when there's a they behind you. In other words, when there's a hard decision and you don't like the answer, it's like, well, they did it, it's they, management team, it's their fault, when all of a sudden you're the they, leadership gets pretty lonely and it gets pretty difficult. And so I think the biggest differences were the weight of it. Me answering to the board and then the whole organization looking, they look to you to say, hey, where are we going and why are we going there? And, so the weight of that was a lot. The complexity, leading a local church, you get to work some with, local leaders and other things like that. Leading one of the largest nonprofits in a big city like Atlanta, you talk to a lot more people, and there's a lot more people who have a lot of opinions about what you do and don't do and how you should do it. And so working with city leaders or politicians or foundations, all of that, like it's just it's a different beast. And so I definitely had to grow a lot there.
Wow. I love what you said about when you become the they. That sounds like a really awesome leadership book title.
Well, I think a lot of people should have to try being the they because it's, I can remember, I can vividly remember having conversations with my boss when I was one of the lead pastors and just not understanding why I couldn't get one more hire. And, who cares what everybody else thinks? Just let me I need this one more hire. It's so obvious. And then, first 2 weeks here, somebody in your office going, we need one more hire. And you're like, we can't do one more hire. I know I agree. You need it, but we can't do it.
So good. One thing that I also imagine must be similar between leading a nonprofit versus leading a church is the challenge of measurement, right? Like, I think it's very tempting, both in a church as well as at a nonprofit, to measure your activity, right? Like, it's very quantifiable. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of measuring that real transformation that you're looking to achieve?
Yeah, this was the thing that drove me crazy for the first year and a half while I was here. Even in the interview process, I noticed pretty quickly that the front end of our funnel was huge. I mean, we would serve 3,000 people a year. And then if you just look at numbers, it's like 3,000 people through our front door, 400 people graduated our vocational program. And I'm like, wait, is that all? Like, are we failing every other time? And we didn't have really good ways to identify success along the way. And so, yes, the bullseye was people graduating our program and maintaining their job and maintaining their housing for a year later. But that couldn't mean we were failing everywhere else. And so what we did as a senior team is we spent a lot of time measuring not just activity, but figuring out how to measure behaviors and measure the things that we said were important. And so we tell people we want them to be healthy, relationally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. We say we want you to be rooted in community. But what I found out really quickly was every single person on the senior team had a different definition of what each of those things meant. And so we had no idea if we were doing them well or not. And so we spent a while just defining terms, aligning on what those definitions were, and then figuring out how we wanted to measure it so that we could create a dashboard as a team to say, yes, we're moving forward. And so now we have really simple ways of measuring, again, not just activity, but we're measuring what we feel like is transformation. Another thing we did is we said our tagline is hope lives here. And so we fought for a while, and I say fought, like, what does hope mean? And like, you should see some of like our whiteboard sessions where we were trying to define how we would define hope and what we wanted somebody to feel on the other side. And we landed in this place where we were able to create literally a hope meter. And throughout the time that somebody's with us, one of our number one goals is that no matter how long you're here, whether it's an hour, a day, a week, a year, you should have more hope when you leave here than when you started. And so that's a very simple thing we do for so at intake, if you're an intake specialist, one of your number one priorities is, does that person on the other side of you feel more hopeful because of their interaction with you? Even if we don't have a bed for you that night, we can still help them be more hopeful. We can give hope. And so it's been really fun and encouraging to our team to be able to track something as, nebulous as hope in a way that we can say, no, we really are. Hope does live here. And people have more hope the longer they're with us and the more interactions they have with us.
Well, so speaking of hope, Tensley, Atlanta Mission is explicitly Christ-centered. How does that show up in what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, we tell everybody and we remind our staff all the time, our faith informs why we serve. It doesn't inform who we serve. I think that's been a really refreshing part of doing this work is that we will serve anybody that comes to our door. Now, for us, we align as an organization around faith, but that faith should be the vehicle we use that helps people feel invited in. And so it's been so encouraging to watch people who show up at our doors and they don't necessarily want anything to do with our faith. They're like, hey, this is the last resort for me, whatever. And watch as God opens their hearts over time as they're around our staff and as they get to experience firsthand the love of Christ. it's remarkable. You see people open up in some really fantastic ways, and we've watched people choose to decide to become followers of Jesus as a result of being a part of our program. We've also had people go all the way through our program and decide, hey, that's still not for me, and that's okay. Like that's hey, we can still help you end your homelessness. Now, we think Jesus has a big part to play in that, and we think that that's part of getting healthy. But it's been really cool to just be able to show up for a city and serve. And I think that's one of the compliments we love the most is that even people who don't believe like us, they're really glad we're here. And they're like actually fine and excited that we do it in the name of Jesus. It's like, that's awesome. You're here doing something for the city that nobody else is doing.
Oh, that's really cool. As you know, Tensley, we have a lot of church leaders who listen to this podcast. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask some questions around how churches can help, how they should get involved. Many churches want to be a part of addressing homelessness, but they're not always sure how to start. In your experience, what are some of the most helpful ways that churches can engage?
I think I know people aren't sure where to start, but I would just say start. That's the most helpful. Like for my small group, we started serving at Christmas. We would serve once a year at Christmas. And now I think every single person in that small group has some personal ministry within Atlanta Mission that goes beyond just us. And I mean, it was so simple. We show up every year with like 30 or 40 gingerbread house kits, and we sit in the cafeteria with our kids that are staying with us with their moms, and we build gingerbread houses together for 2 hours, and the kids just love it, and it's amazing. And so, I mean, I think every single person has something that they can offer. What I walked through one of our campuses one day, and out in the courtyard, somebody was doing yoga, and I was like, "What is going on?" And they're like, "Oh, she's a yoga instructor, and she showed up at our door and was like, 'Hey, is there anything I can do with my talent that would make people's lives better?'" We're like, "Yes, absolutely there is." And so now she teaches the yoga class, once a week. And everybody has something to offer, whether they realize it or not. I think, again, back to the misconceptions about the people we serve. There's a great book that's called Same Kind of Different as Me. And I think if we all just understood that, is that we're all just the same kind of different. Like everybody's different and we're all different. And so the person who's staying with us versus the person who are far more similar than we realize. And you have talents and abilities. So just jump in. I talk a lot about some of our projects are do for service opportunities and some are be with. And I think figuring out for you what makes most sense. Do for is like, hey, I'm going to come help beautify the campus. I'm going to come serve a meal. I'm going to, do something in the grounds to make it prettier. I'm going to do something for somebody else. And those are great. I love them. We need them. But the Be With projects are really special. That's like the gingerbread house. That's just, we do a once a month birthday party for every kid who's having a birthday that month. And just hey, come throw a birthday party for a bunch of kids. Like, who doesn't want to throw a birthday party? Like that's awesome. So no matter if you're in Atlanta or wherever, if you would think about opportunities as, is this a moment that I can do something for somebody, or should I go be with somebody? Because again, back to that relational poverty, you have no idea what it does, especially in the life of a child, to have 2 hours around somebody where they genuinely feel loved and cared for. And that might be the first time in their life that they feel that in a way that you have to offer.
Wow. Wow, that's so good. Let me bring our conversation to a close with this final question, Tensley, which is, you are working on the front lines of some very difficult human realities every day. Like, what keeps you hopeful and keeps you going every day?
Our clients. My predecessor told me, and I have held on to this for the 4.5, almost 5 years I've been here. Every time I start to feel hopeless or the job starts to feel overwhelming, I just go be with our clients. They are so inspiring. Our staff also, I mean, they're so inspiring the way they show up. We get to deal with some hard things. We get to deal with frustration. There's definitely, no matter what you do, somebody doesn't like it or isn't happy with it. And so, it can feel hard and heavy. But our clients are what keep me going. I mean, when you see somebody come through our doors and then a year later you watch them walk out of our doors, you'll get up and do it again the next day.
Wow.
It's remarkable.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for this conversation, Tensley. We've covered a lot of ground, and I feel like I've gotten so much fresh insight into leadership, into nonprofit leadership, and also into the state of homelessness. Like, I'm here in New York City, where it is a real and daily reality for us here as well. And I feel like I've gotten fresh insight and wisdom into how I and the church that I'm a part of can engage in that. So thank you.
Absolutely. If you have the opportunity, look up the Bowery. We're connected with them. Love what James and his team are doing. Great organization in New York. And so I would encourage you. It's a great place to get involved.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Tensley. Really appreciate your time today and hope to continue the conversation another time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Alicia.